During roll call, my professor said my name, looked up, and went completely white. You're here. In class. Right now. Yeah? I said, confused by the weird way she was staring at me. The entire lecture hall went silent. 60 students turned to look at me at once. Professor Looney just stood there frozen, her attendance sheet shaking in her hands. A girl in the front row gasped and covered her mouth. 2 guys in the back were whispering and pointing. This girl I'd never talked to walked up to my desk. "Oh my God, I'm so glad you're okay." That must have been so terrifying. "What are you talking about?" She looked at me like I was insane. "You don't know?" "Know what?" Professor Looney finally spoke up, her voice shaky. "Madison, please stay after class. I need to speak with you immediately." She looked at the rest of the class. "Everyone else is dismissed early today." The room erupted in whispers as students packed up, but they kept staring at me. One guy came up and squeezed my shoulder. "Stay strong," he said seriously. I had no idea what was happening. I reached for my phone to check social media, but remembered it had died overnight, and I'd forgotten my charger at my boyfriend's apartment. Whatever everyone knew, I was completely in the dark. I tried to leave class to find my roommate Claire, but Professor Looney stopped me. "Madison, please wait. Campus security is on their way." "Security? Why?" Before she could answer, my phone buzzed back to life. Someone had plugged a charger into the wall outlet near my desk. The second it turned on, notifications exploded. 63 missed calls from my parents. 42 texts. Dozens of Instagram DMs from people I barely knew. I ran out of the classroom before Professor Looney could stop me. I needed to get back to my dorm and figure out what was happening. I sprinted across campus to my building. The second I walked into the lobby, my RA Stephanie saw me and dropped her clipboard. It clattered on the floor. "Holy crap! Holy crap!" She immediately pulled out her phone and called someone. "She's here. Madison's here." "Yes, I'm looking right at her." She was talking about me like I was a ghost. "Stephanie, what is going on?" Campus security rushed through the door before she could answer. 2 officers. They didn't grab me, but they positioned themselves on either side. "Madison Wilkins, you need to come with us to the dean's office right now." "Why? What did I do?" "Just come with us, please." We walked across campus with students stopping and staring. Some were taking pictures. One girl was crying. When we got to the administration building, the dean was waiting in her office. My parents were already on speakerphone. "Madison? Madison?" My mom was sobbing hysterically. "Mom? What's wrong? Why is everyone acting insane?" Thank God you're alive." The dean gestured for me to sit. "Madison, we've been trying to reach you since 3 this morning." My phone was dead. I was at my boyfriend's apartment. The dean and the security officers exchanged looks. "You weren't in your dorm room last night?" "No. Why? What happened?" The dean turned her computer monitor toward me. "Campus emergency alert. Sent at 3:21 a.m. Active shooter reported in Warren Hall, 3rd floor. 1 fatality. Suspect in custody. Shelter in place lifted." My dorm building. My floor. I felt the room tilt. "Madison," the dean said carefully, "your roommate Claire called 911 at 3:26 this morning. She said there was someone in your room with a gun. She said you'd been shot. She gave them your full name, your physical description, everything. But I wasn't there. We know that now. But at 3:45, police entered your room and found a body, face down, wearing pajamas with the initials MC embroidered on the chest. The pajamas my mom had sent me last month as a gift. The ones I'd left on my bed yesterday. The body matched your description. Same height, same hair color, same build. Your roommate identified her as you from the doorway before paramedics took her out." My mom was crying on the phone. "They sent us photos to identify." "I thought you were dead, Madison. I thought my baby was dead." "But who?" I couldn't finish the sentence. The dean pulled up another photo on her computer. Crime scene tape across my dorm room door. Police officers standing in the hallway. My stomach turned. "If you weren't in your room," the dean said slowly, "then who did your roommate see get shot?" "We found Claire 2 hours ago," the security officer said quietly. "She was in the campus chapel, catatonic, in shock. She kept repeating the same thing over and over." He paused. "She looked just like her. Exactly like her." I couldn't move. My hands gripped the arms of the chair so hard my knuckles turned white. The dean kept looking at me like she expected me to disappear, like maybe I was some kind of ghost that would fade away if she blinked. My mom's crying came through the speakerphone in broken gasps that made my chest hurt. I wanted to say something, but my brain couldn't form words because nothing about this made sense. Someone who looked exactly like me got shot in my room while wearing my pajamas. The dean clicked her mouse and the computer screen changed. She angled the monitor toward me but kept her hand covering most of it. I could only see a small section at the bottom showing fabric with dark stains. Pink pajamas with little white clouds on them. The initials MC stitched in purple thread on the chest pocket. My mom had sent those to me 6 weeks ago with a note saying she missed me. I'd left them on my bed yesterday morning because I was running late to class. My stomach dropped so fast I thought I might throw up right there in the dean's office. Someone else had been wearing my clothes. Someone else had been in my bed. Someone else died instead of me. The dean closed the photo quickly, and I heard my dad's voice come through the phone asking if I was okay. I wasn't okay. Nothing was okay. A knock on the door made everyone jump, and a man in a dark suit walked in without waiting for an answer. He had gray hair and tired eyes, and he looked at me the same way everyone else had been looking at me all morning, like I was something impossible. He introduced himself as Detective Ramirez and pulled up a chair right next to mine. He smelled like coffee and had a notepad in his hand covered in messy handwriting. He asked me to walk him through my entire day yesterday, starting from when I woke up. I told him about going to my morning classes, eating lunch at the dining hall with some friends, studying in the library for 3 hours. My voice sounded weird and distant, like it was coming from someone else. He wrote everything down and asked what time I left campus. I said around 8 at night because Quincy texted asking if I wanted to come over and watch movies. The detective asked who Quincy was, and I explained he was my boyfriend, and he lived in an apartment about 15 minutes from campus. We'd been dating for 5 months. I went to his place and we watched 2 movies, and I fell asleep on his couch around midnight. When I woke up this morning, my phone was dead, so I borrowed his charger, but it was the wrong type, so I just left without it. I got to campus around 9:30 for my 10 o'clock class. Detective Ramirez nodded and kept writing. He asked if anyone could confirm I was at Quincy's apartment all night. I said yes. Quincy could, obviously. The detective said they'd need to talk to him soon. Then he asked me something that made my skin go cold. He asked if I had a twin sister. I said no immediately. I'm an only child. I've always been an only child. My parents said the same thing through the phone, their voices confused and kind of defensive. But my mom's voice had this weird shake to it that made me look at the phone sitting on the dean's desk. Something about the way she said it felt off, like she was trying too hard to sound certain. Detective Ramirez watched my face while I processed this, and I could tell he noticed my reaction. He asked if I was sure, and I said, "Of course I'm sure. I think I'd know if I had a twin." He nodded slowly and made another note. The detective pulled out his phone and turned it toward me. The screen showed a photo of a man I'd never seen before in my life. He looked maybe 30 or 35 with a thick beard and dark hair pulled back in a small ponytail. His eyes were intense in a way that made me uncomfortable, even though it was just a picture. Detective Ramirez asked if I knew this person. I shook my head and said I'd never seen him. The detective said his name was Zacharias Brock and asked again if I was absolutely sure I didn't know him. I said I was sure. I'd remember a face like that. There was something wrong about his eyes in the photo, something that made me want to look away. The detective put his phone back in his pocket and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. He explained that Zacharias broke into Warren Hall around 3 in the morning. Security footage showed him entering through a side door that someone had propped open with a textbook. He went straight to the 3rd floor without hesitating, like he knew exactly where he was going. He walked directly to my room, number 312, and somehow got the door open within 30 seconds. The victim was in my bed. Zacharias shot her once in the chest, and Claire's screaming from the other bedroom brought campus security running. They caught him trying to leave through the same side door. He didn't run or fight. He just stood there. And when they asked him what he'd done, he said he killed Madison Wilkins. He said my full name. He said it like he'd been planning it, like he knew exactly who he came for. The detective paused and looked at me carefully. Zacharias confessed immediately and asked if Madison was really dead. He seemed happy about it. My hands started shaking and I pressed them between my knees to make it stop. This man came to my room specifically. He knew my name. He knew where I lived. He came there to kill me. Detective Ramirez asked if I'd ever used dating apps or posted my dorm room location online or had any problems with stalkers. I shook my head to all of it. I'm careful about that stuff. I don't put personal information on social media. I don't check in at locations. I definitely don't post about where I live. The detective asked about my Instagram and if it was private. I said yes, it's been private since high school. He asked how many followers I had, and I said maybe 200. Mostly people I actually know. He made more notes and said they'd need access to all my social media accounts to investigate how Zacharias might have found me. The dean said I could use her phone to call Quincy, and I grabbed it so fast I almost dropped it. My fingers fumbled with the numbers because they were shaking so bad. Quincy answered on the 2nd ring, and I could barely get words out before I started crying. I told him where I was, and he said he'd be there in 10 minutes. Detective Ramirez said some other things about the investigation, but I couldn't focus on anything except the sound of Quincy's car starting through the phone. He kept saying, "It's okay. I'm coming. Just wait for me." 15 minutes later, he burst through the dean's office door, breathing hard like he'd run the whole way. He wrapped his arms around me, and I finally let myself fall apart. I cried into his shoulder while he held me tight, and I couldn't stop thinking about how I almost died last night. If I'd gone back to my dorm instead of staying at his place, that would have been me. I would have been the one wearing those pajamas. I would have been the one who got shot. Quincy kept saying, "I'm here, you're safe, I've got you." My mom's voice came through the speakerphone saying they'd booked emergency flights and would land around 8 tonight. She kept asking if I was okay, and I couldn't answer because I wasn't okay, and wouldn't be okay for a very long time. My dad said they'd get a hotel near campus and stay as long as I needed them. But then my mom asked to talk to me privately, and her voice had that weird shake again, that sound that made my stomach twist. The dean led me to a small conference room down the hall with just a phone on the table. She closed the door and left me alone. I picked up the phone and my mom's voice came through so quiet I almost couldn't hear her. She asked me strange questions about the victim's appearance. She wanted to know about birthmarks or scars or any identifying features. I told her I hadn't seen the body and didn't want to see the body. She kept pushing, asking if anyone had described what the victim looked like beyond just saying she looked like me. I said no and asked why she cared so much about these details. My mom went quiet for a long time. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, fast and uneven like she was trying not to cry. Finally, she said there was something about my birth she never told me. Something they'd kept secret my whole life because they thought it was the right thing to do. But now everything was different, and I needed to know the truth. Her voice broke on the last word, and I felt my whole body go numb, waiting for whatever she was about to say. My mom's voice came out broken and shaky. She said I wasn't an only child. She said I had a twin sister. The words didn't make sense at first. I just sat there holding the phone while she cried and tried to explain. She said when we were born, there were 2 babies. 2 girls. Identical twins. But something went wrong after we came home from the hospital. My mom said she got really sick. Not physically sick, but mentally sick. She couldn't handle taking care of 2 newborns at once. She said Child Protective Services came when we were 3 days old and took one of the babies away. They took my sister. My mom kept crying and saying they were told the baby would be adopted by another family. They were told they'd never see her again. She said it was too painful to talk about, so they decided never to tell me. They thought it would be easier if I just never knew. I couldn't breathe. I had a sister. A twin sister. My entire life I thought I was an only child and nobody bothered to mention I had an identical twin somewhere out there. My mom begged me not to jump to conclusions. She said they'd explain everything when they got here tonight. She said to wait until they could tell me the full story in person. But my brain was already connecting the dots. Someone who looked exactly like me. Someone wearing my pajamas. Someone who died in my room. The impossible coincidence suddenly made horrible sense. I asked my mom what they named her. My mom's voice broke completely. She said they called her Mila. I walked back to the main office in a daze. Detective Ramirez was there talking to the dean. He looked up when I came in. I told him about the twin sister. My voice shook saying the words out loud. I explained my mom just told me I was born a twin, but one baby was taken by Child Protective Services when we were 3 days old. The detective and the dean looked at each other. Detective Ramirez wrote something in his notebook. He said they needed to get dental records and DNA samples to properly identify the victim. He said it would take a few days, but it might confirm what I was thinking. The dean asked if I was okay, and I laughed because that was the stupidest question anyone had ever asked me. I just found out I had a secret twin sister who might be the person who got shot in my room. No, I wasn't okay. Detective Ramirez asked for my parents' contact information. He asked if they had any adoption records or documentation about what happened. I gave him their phone number and email. He said if the victim really was my twin sister, they needed to understand how she ended up in my dorm room. They needed to know why Zacharias Brock was targeting someone who looked like me. He said the whole situation just got a lot more complicated. Campus security came to get me. 2 different officers this time. They said my original dorm was still a crime scene and would be for at least another week. They were moving me to a temporary room in a different building across campus. I followed them outside. Students were everywhere between classes. More people stared and pointed. Some took pictures with their phones. One girl ran up and hugged me before security pulled her away. The temporary room was in Kennedy Hall, 3rd floor. Single room with just 1 bed. The officers unlocked the door and handed me the key. They said to call if I needed anything. Quincy showed up 10 minutes later. Someone must have told him where they moved me. He wrapped his arms around me and I buried my face in his chest. We sat on the unfamiliar bed. The room smelled like cleaning products and old carpet. Quincy asked what my mom said on the phone. I told him about the twin sister. About Mila. He just held me tighter. We sat there for a long time not talking. There was nothing to say that made any of this make sense. My phone was finally charged all the way. I opened my messages. There were so many I had to scroll for minutes to see them all. People I barely knew from classes. People I'd met once at parties. Random acquaintances saying they were praying for me. Saying they couldn't believe I was gone. Saying I was too young and it wasn't fair. Reading messages about my own death felt like watching a movie about someone else's life. 3 different people asked about memorial funds. Someone wanted to know about funeral arrangements. A girl from my biology lab wrote a long paragraph about how I'd been so nice to her when she was struggling. I didn't even remember talking to her. The notifications kept coming. Instagram DMs, Facebook messages, Snapchat. Everyone thought I was dead. Everyone had already started grieving me. I showed Quincy some of the messages. He looked sick reading them. He said it was messed up that I had to see people talking about me like this. I agreed, but I couldn't stop scrolling. The dean called my temporary room phone around noon. She said Claire's parents had taken her home that morning. She said Claire was found in the campus chapel around dawn. She'd been sitting in a pew for hours, completely shut down, not responding when people talked to her. She was under psychiatric care now. The dean said I couldn't visit or contact Claire right now. Her doctor said she needed time to process what she saw. I wanted to talk to Claire so badly. She was the only person who actually saw what happened in my room. She was the only one who could tell me about those final moments. But the dean was firm. No contact until Claire's therapist said it was okay. I hung up feeling even more helpless. Quincy ordered food delivery because neither of us could handle going to the dining hall. We ate in silence. The food tasted like nothing. My parents' flight landed at 7:30. They texted saying they'd get a rental car and come straight to campus. I met them in the parking lot outside Kennedy Hall. My mom saw me and started crying again. She ran over and hugged me so hard I could barely breathe. She kept saying, "Thank God, thank God, thank God." My dad just stood there staring at me. Tears ran down his face. He looked like he'd aged 10 years since I last saw him. We couldn't stay on campus. None of us could handle being there. My dad had booked a hotel room about 2 miles away. We drove there in silence. The hotel was nice, clean, generic. We sat in their room, 2 queen beds and a small table. My mom and dad sat on one bed. I sat on the other. Quincy stayed in the car to give us privacy. Finally, my mom started talking. She told me the full story about my twin sister. My mom said the pregnancy was really hard. She was sick the whole time, throwing up constantly, in and out of the hospital. When we were born, she was exhausted. She said bringing home 2 newborns was overwhelming. She said she couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't think straight. She said she didn't know she was sick at the time, but looking back, she had really bad postpartum depression. One night when we were 3 days old, both babies were crying. My mom said she couldn't get either of us to stop. She tried everything. She was so tired she could barely stand up. The neighbors heard the crying for hours. They called the police for a wellness check. When the social workers came inside, they found one twin with signs of neglect. That twin was Mila. My dad was at work. My mom was barely conscious on the couch. The social workers took Mila to the hospital. Mila had been left in a dirty diaper for so long she had bad infections. The social workers checked me too. I was fine. Clean diaper, no signs of neglect. My mom said that's when she realized something was really wrong with her. She said she didn't remember neglecting Mila. She didn't remember anything from those 3 days clearly. Everything was a blur of crying and exhaustion. My parents were investigated. They had to take parenting classes. They were monitored by social services for a whole year. But Mila was removed permanently. The court decided it was too risky to return her. She was placed with a foster family and then adopted. My parents tried to fight it, but the evidence was clear. One twin showed signs of serious neglect. The other didn't. The system decided to protect the baby who'd been hurt. My mom said losing Mila destroyed her, but it also forced her to get help for her depression. She said she got treatment. She got better. She learned how to be a good mom to me. But Mila was gone. The adoption was closed. They couldn't contact her. They couldn't know where she went. My parents said they tried for years to find information, but everything was sealed. Eventually, they decided it was better to move forward. Better to focus on raising me. Better not to tell me about the sister I'd never meet. My mom sobbed, saying she was sick and didn't know how to ask for help back then. She said she was sorry. So sorry. My dad said they thought they were protecting me from pain. He said now he knew that was selfish and wrong. My mom kept talking through her tears, explaining how losing Mila forced her to finally get real help for her depression. She said she went to therapy for years, took medication, learned how to be a good mom to me. But Mila was gone, and there was nothing they could do about it. My dad jumped in saying they tried everything to find information about where Mila went, or who adopted her, but the state sealed all the adoption records. They hired a lawyer who told them closed adoptions meant no contact, no information, nothing. After a few years of hitting dead ends everywhere they turned, my parents made the choice to stop searching. My mom said it was too painful to keep looking for a daughter she'd never get back, and they convinced themselves it was better for everyone if they just moved forward with our lives. I sat there feeling 2 opposite things at once. Part of me wanted to scream at them for keeping this huge secret my entire life, for robbing me of even knowing I had a sister out there somewhere. But another part of me felt completely heartbroken imagining Mila growing up without us, never knowing she had a twin, living a whole separate life. My dad must have seen something in my face because he reached across and put his hand on mine. He said they told themselves for years that they were protecting me from pain by not mentioning Mila, but sitting here now he understood that was just them protecting themselves from guilt and shame. He said it was selfish and he was sorry. We sat in heavy silence for a while. My mom kept wiping her eyes. My dad stared at the floor. I didn't know what to say to them. How do you respond to finding out your parents hid a twin sister from you for 19 years? Around 10 that night, my phone rang. Detective Ramirez. He said the medical examiner started processing dental records and DNA samples to officially identify the victim. The results would take a couple days, but he wanted me to know they were working on it. Then he paused and said there was something else. Zacharias Brock was asking to speak with me from jail. The detective's voice got serious when he said Zacharias claimed he had information about why he came to my room specifically, details that might help us understand what happened. But Detective Ramirez strongly advised against any contact with Zacharias until we knew more about the situation. He said Zacharias was clearly unstable, and talking to him could be dangerous even through jail phones and glass barriers. I told the detective I definitely didn't want to talk to the man who killed someone in my room. Just thinking about him made my skin feel weird. We said goodnight, and I tried to sleep on the hotel room couch while my parents took one of the beds, but I couldn't stop my brain from spinning. I kept thinking about Mila and what her life was like after child services took her away. Did her adoptive parents tell her she was adopted? Or did she grow up thinking they were her real family? Did she ever feel like something was missing? Like she had a sister somewhere she couldn't remember? And the biggest question that wouldn't leave me alone was, how did she end up in my dorm room the exact same night someone came there to kill me? It couldn't be random. That was too big a thing to be a complete accident. I must have finally fallen asleep around 4 in the morning because the next thing I knew my phone was ringing and sun was coming through the hotel curtains. Detective Ramirez again. His voice sounded different this time, more careful. He said the preliminary DNA results came back already, and they confirmed what we suspected. The victim was my biological twin sister. He said they were working fast now to track down her adoption records and find out where she'd been living all these years, because this changed everything about the investigation. Knowing the victim was my identical twin who nobody knew existed made the whole case way more complicated. Within a few hours, Detective Ramirez called back with more information. They'd located Mila's adoptive family, a couple named Frank and Susan Whitmore who lived about 3 hours away in a smaller town. The detective said he'd spoken to them and they were completely shocked and devastated. They had no idea Mila was planning to visit my campus that night. She'd told them she was staying at a friend's house. They thought she was safe in bed when actually she was driving here for some reason we still didn't understand. Detective Ramirez said he was sending me some links to look at. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed with texts containing Mila's social media profiles. I opened them and felt my stomach do something strange. There on my phone screen was my exact face but on a completely different person. Mila had posted tons of photos. Pictures of her painting and drawing, photos with friends I'd never met, selfies wearing clothes I would never choose, styles that weren't mine at all. But when I looked at her smile, it was like seeing myself in a mirror. We had the same eyes, same nose, same everything. The only differences were her hair was a bit longer and she wore different makeup. I scrolled back through months of posts, seeing my face living a life I knew nothing about. She posted about art shows and music concerts. She shared memes about being an introvert. She had photos with the Whitmores who looked like nice, normal people. It was so weird seeing this whole existence that was connected to me but completely separate. Then I found a post from 2 weeks ago that made me stop breathing for a second. Mila had shared a screenshot of DNA ancestry test results. The post said she'd always felt different from her family, and finally decided to take one of those DNA tests you can order online. The results showed she had a close relative match, a twin sister. She'd posted my full name, Madison Wilkins, along with my university. Her caption said she was working up the courage to reach out and meet me, that she couldn't believe she had a twin out there she never knew about. The post had dozens of comments from her friends saying how crazy and exciting this was, telling her she should definitely contact me. My hands shook holding my phone. Mila knew about me. She'd known for 2 whole weeks. Detective Ramirez called again and I told him about the post. He said that explained a lot. Mila must have found my dorm information online after seeing that DNA match. The university directory listed student housing assignments. My social media had location tags from campus. It wouldn't have been hard for her to figure out exactly where I lived. The detective's voice got quiet when he said Mila probably came to campus that night, planning to surprise me or finally introduce herself after weeks of knowing I existed but being too nervous to make contact. He said based on the timeline, she likely arrived at my dorm around 3 in the morning. Maybe she'd been too excited to sleep. Maybe she thought showing up late would be more private. We'd probably never know exactly what she was thinking. Then Detective Ramirez explained what he believed happened, and I felt sick listening. Mila got to my room somehow. Probably picked the lock based on tools they found in her backpack. She was wearing my pajamas that I'd left on my bed, maybe trying them on because they were her twin sister's clothes. She was there in my dark room when Zacharias Brock broke in looking for me. He saw someone my height with my hair wearing pajamas with my initials. In the dark, he thought it was me. He shot her. She died in my place because she looked exactly like me and was wearing my clothes and happened to be in my room the exact moment a man came there to kill me. I couldn't stop thinking about all the what-ifs that kept running through my head over and over. If I'd posted more on social media, if I'd checked my messages more often, if I'd somehow known she existed, maybe Mila would have just sent me a message instead of showing up at 3 in the morning. Maybe she'd still be alive if I'd been easier to reach, if she hadn't felt like she had to surprise me because she was too scared to make first contact online. The guilt sat heavy in my chest, making it hard to breathe normally. Detective Ramirez called again the next morning with updates about the investigation. He said they were trying to figure out exactly how Mila got into my locked dorm room in the first place. I told him I had no idea, that my door was definitely locked when I left for class that day. He said they'd searched through Mila's belongings more carefully and found something interesting in her backpack. There were lockpicking tools, the kind you can order online, along with what looked like instructions she'd printed out. She'd also been carrying a letter addressed to me that she never got the chance to deliver. My hand started shaking when he told me about the letter. Detective Ramirez asked if I wanted to read it, and I said yes, even though part of me was scared of what it might say. He came to the hotel where my parents and I were staying and brought the letter in a clear plastic evidence bag. It was 3 pages long, handwritten in neat, careful letters. I sat on the hotel bed and started reading while my parents waited quietly nearby. Mila wrote about taking the DNA test on a whim after years of feeling like something was missing in her life. She wrote about seeing my name pop up as a close relative match and not believing it at first, thinking it had to be some kind of mistake. She spent 2 whole weeks looking at every photo I'd ever posted online, reading every caption, trying to learn everything about me before working up the courage to reach out. She was scared I wouldn't want to know her, or that I'd be angry about her existence. She wrote that she practiced what she'd say to me dozens of times, but it never felt right. And finally, she just decided to drive to campus and surprise me because she couldn't stand waiting anymore. The last paragraph said she hoped I'd understand and forgive her for showing up unannounced, and that she just wanted to meet her twin sister more than anything in the world. I cried reading those words, tears falling on the plastic bag protecting the letter she'd written hours before she died. Detective Ramirez gave me a few minutes to pull myself together before explaining they still needed to figure out why Zacharias came to my room that specific night. He said Zacharias had a history of mental health problems and some past incidents of obsessive behavior toward women, but nothing violent before this. They couldn't find any obvious connection between us until they started digging deeper into his online activity and social media presence. What they discovered made my skin crawl in a way I'd never felt before. Zacharias had been following me on social media for at least 6 months using multiple fake accounts with different names and profile pictures. He'd liked and saved hundreds of my photos, screenshotted my stories, and apparently spent hours every day looking at my posts and building up this whole fantasy in his head. The detective showed me printouts of messages Zacharias had sent to himself pretending to be me, having entire conversations with himself where he imagined we were in a relationship. It was completely insane seeing this stranger's twisted version of my life that existed only in his mind. Detective Ramirez explained this was something called extreme parasocial obsession, where someone convinces themselves they have a real relationship with a person they've never actually met. Zacharias had followed my posts so closely that he knew my class schedule, where I liked to eat on campus, and obviously which dorm building I lived in. When I started posting photos with Quincy a few months ago, Zacharias's fake account messages to himself turned angry and violent. He wrote about how I'd betrayed him and needed to be punished for choosing someone else. He'd been planning the attack for weeks, studying Warren Hall's security, figuring out how to get to the 3rd floor, waiting for what he thought was the right moment to act. The detective said Zacharias was sitting in jail completely devastated now, but not because he felt guilty about killing someone. He was upset because his obsession was with me specifically, and he'd killed the wrong person by mistake. Apparently, he kept asking the guards if I would come visit him in jail, which made me feel physically sick just hearing about it. The fact that he still thought we had some kind of connection after murdering my sister showed how disconnected from reality he really was. A few days later, Mila's adoptive parents reached out through Detective Ramirez asking if they could meet me and my parents. We agreed to gather at the hotel in a conference room the hotel manager let us use. Frank and Susan Whitmore arrived right on time looking tired and sad, their eyes red from crying. My parents and I stood up when they walked in, and for a long moment nobody knew what to say or do. Susan started crying the second she saw me, probably because I looked exactly like the daughter she'd just lost. We all sat around a table in uncomfortable silence until Susan pulled out her phone and asked if she could show me some photos of Mila growing up. I said yes, and she swiped through hundreds of pictures starting from when Mila was a tiny baby. Every photo felt strange because I was looking at my own face at every age, but in someone else's life completely. There was toddler Mila learning to walk, child Mila on her first day of school, teenage Mila at what looked like an art show. Frank spoke up saying Mila was artistic and kind, that she loved painting and drawing more than anything. He said she always felt a little different from them, even though they loved her with everything they had, and when that DNA test came back showing she had a twin sister, she was absolutely thrilled. Susan showed me Mila's high school graduation photo, and I stared at it for a long time because it could have been my own graduation photo if I'd worn different clothes and done my hair differently. My mom finally spoke up through tears, her voice shaky and quiet. She apologized to the Whitmores for what happened when Mila was a baby, trying to explain about her postpartum depression and how sick she was back then. She said she knew it didn't excuse the neglect that led to Mila being taken away, but she wanted them to understand she'd been struggling and didn't know how to ask for help. Susan was gracious in her response, saying she understood it was complicated, but I could see the pain in her eyes knowing that Mila's biological mother had given her up even if the circumstances were difficult. Frank cleared his throat and pulled out his phone, scrolling through photos until he found one of Mila from last month. She was sitting in their living room with paint on her hands and a huge smile. He showed it to me and my parents. Susan wiped her eyes and started talking about how Mila was always impulsive, always jumping into things without thinking them through completely. She said when Mila found out about me from that DNA test, she became obsessed with the idea of meeting me. Susan explained that Mila had been planning to reach out properly, maybe write a letter first or send a message through social media, but she got too excited and impatient. Frank nodded and added that the night she died, Mila had told them she was staying at a friend's house to work on an art project. Instead, she drove to campus around midnight, too wound up to wait any longer. Susan's voice cracked when she said that was so typical of Mila, diving headfirst into things that mattered to her without considering the risks or making a real plan first. My mom reached across the table and squeezed Susan's hand. The gesture felt heavy with meaning, two mothers connected by loving the same person in different ways. Frank said they wished Mila had told them the truth about where she was going. He said they would have driven her to campus themselves, helped her plan a proper meeting, been there to support both of us through that first conversation. Instead, she snuck out after they went to bed, drove 3 hours alone in the dark, and picked the lock on my dorm room because she couldn't wait until morning. The conversation shifted to funeral arrangements, and suddenly I was sitting at a table planning a burial for someone I never knew existed, until she was already dead. Susan asked if I wanted to help choose the flowers and casket, if I had any preferences for the service. The question felt impossible to answer because what did I know about what Mila would have wanted? But Susan insisted I was family too, that I had every right to be part of these decisions even though we never met. My mom offered to help coordinate with the funeral home, and my dad said he would handle the financial arrangements, which made Frank protest until they agreed to split the costs. We spent 2 hours in that conference room looking at funeral home websites on our phones, discussing whether Mila would prefer roses or lilies, debating between burial and cremation, until Susan broke down crying and said burial because she needed a place to visit. The whole thing felt wrong and surreal, mourning someone who should have been my closest person, but was instead a complete stranger. I kept looking at photos of Mila on Susan's phone, seeing my own face in her expressions, trying to connect with a sister who existed only in past tense now. The Whitmores showed us pictures of Mila's artwork, abstract paintings full of color and emotion, and Susan said we should display some at the service. I agreed even though I didn't understand the paintings, didn't know what they meant to Mila, or why she chose those particular colors and shapes. Frank mentioned that Mila's best friend Landon had been devastated by the news and wanted to speak at the funeral. Susan nodded and said Landon knew Mila better than anyone, that he could share stories and memories that would help everyone understand who she really was. 5 days later, I stood in a funeral home wearing a black dress my mom bought me specifically for this occasion. The room filled up with people I didn't know, extended family members who stared at me with shock written across their faces. I saw my own features reflected in cousins and aunts and uncles, the same nose and cheekbones and eye shapes scattered across strangers. Mila's friends clustered together near the front, young people my age crying and hugging each other. Some of them kept glancing at me and whispering, clearly disturbed by seeing Mila's identical face on someone who wasn't her. The casket was closed, which I was grateful for because I didn't think I could handle seeing my own face dead. Photos of Mila covered every surface, chronological displays of her life from baby pictures to recent selfies. I walked along the tables studying each image, watching myself grow up in an alternate timeline. Susan had set up an easel with one of Mila's paintings, something abstract with blues and purples swirling together. The service started, and a pastor who never knew Mila said generic things about loss and heaven. Then Mila's art teacher spoke about her talent and passion. Then Frank stood up and could barely get through 2 sentences before Susan had to take over, her voice shaking as she talked about their daughter's kindness and creativity. When it was my turn, I walked to the front on legs that felt disconnected from my body. I looked out at all those faces staring at me, some crying, some angry, some just confused about who I was and why I was there. I said I wished I had known Mila, that I would spend the rest of my life wondering what we could have been to each other. I said I was sorry she died trying to meet me, and I promised to honor her memory by living fully enough for both of us. My voice broke on the last words and I had to sit down. After the service, people came up to offer condolences, and several seemed unsure whether to treat me as a mourner or as someone connected to Mila's death. An older woman who introduced herself as Mila's grandmother hugged me and cried into my shoulder. A young guy with red eyes approached me cautiously and said his name was Landon Swain, that he was Mila's best friend since middle school. He asked if we could talk somewhere quieter, and I followed him to a side room away from the crowd. Landon pulled out his phone and showed me photos of him and Mila together, dozens of images spanning years of friendship. He told me about the time Mila convinced him to skip school and drive to the beach, how she always knew exactly what to say when he was upset, the way she laughed so hard at stupid jokes that she would snort. He said after Mila got her DNA results back, she talked about me constantly, showing him my social media profiles and analyzing every photo trying to figure out what kind of person I was. Landon explained that Mila felt like she'd been missing something her whole life, and finding out about me filled in that blank space. He said she spent weeks researching everything about me, learning my class schedule from posts I'd made, figuring out which dorm building I lived in, studying my face like she was trying to memorize a map. Landon's voice got quiet when he said Mila had been planning to message me but kept chickening out, afraid I wouldn't want anything to do with her. He said the night she died, she'd texted him around 11 saying she couldn't wait anymore, that she was driving to campus right then to finally meet me face to face. Landon reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small sketchbook with a worn cover. He said Mila had asked him to hold on to it a few weeks ago, that it contained her most personal drawings, and she didn't want her parents seeing them yet. He handed it to me and said he thought I should have it now. I opened the sketchbook with shaking hands and found page after page of pencil drawings. There were landscapes and abstract designs, portraits of people I didn't recognize, studies of hands and eyes and faces. Then I turned a page and saw myself. Mila had drawn me based on my Instagram photos. Multiple sketches from different angles showing my face with careful attention to detail. She'd captured expressions I made without realizing, the slight tilt of my head when I smiled, the way my eyes looked when I was thinking about something serious. I flipped through more pages and found at least a dozen drawings of me, some full portraits and some just quick studies. Near the end of the sketchbook, I found a drawing that made me stop breathing. It showed two identical girls facing each other with their arms wrapped around each other in a tight hug. The faces were rough sketches, not fully detailed, but the emotion in the drawing was clear. This was what Mila had imagined, the moment we would finally meet and recognize ourselves in each other. I stared at that drawing of two sisters embracing, and something broke open inside my chest. Tears came so hard I couldn't see, couldn't breathe, could only clutch that sketchbook and sob for the life we should have had together. Landon put his arm around my shoulders and let me cry, not saying anything because there was nothing to say that would fix this. 2 weeks after the funeral, Claire's parents finally agreed to let her have visitors. Detective Ramirez called and asked if I wanted to see her, warning me that she was heavily medicated and still struggling with what she'd witnessed. I said yes because I needed Claire to know I didn't blame her for anything. Ramirez picked me up and we drove to Claire's parents' house an hour outside the city. Her mom answered the door looking exhausted and led us to the living room where Claire sat curled up on the couch in pajamas. She looked smaller than I remembered, thinner, with dark circles under her eyes. When Claire saw me, she started shaking, her whole body trembling like she was cold. She pressed herself back into the couch cushions, and tears started running down her face. She kept saying the same thing over and over, that I wasn't supposed to be here, that I was supposed to be dead, that she watched me die. Her mom tried to calm her down, but Claire just kept staring at me with wild eyes. Detective Ramirez sat down across from her and spoke in a gentle voice, reminding her that I wasn't the person who died, that my twin sister Mila had been in my room that night. Claire nodded, but she didn't seem to really hear him. She pulled her knees up to her chest and wrapped her arms around them, rocking slightly back and forth. After a few minutes, Claire's breathing slowed down, and she started talking in this flat, emotionless voice that was somehow worse than the crying. She described hearing a noise around 3 a.m, something that woke her up from sleep. She said she opened her bedroom door just a crack to peek out, and saw someone standing in my room wearing those pajamas with the initials on the chest. Claire said she thought it was me, that everything about the person looked exactly like me from behind. Then she heard the door to my room open and saw a man walk in with something in his hand. Claire said she knew it was a gun even in the dark, that she froze in her doorway unable to move or scream. She watched the man raise the gun and fire once, watched the person in my pajamas fall forward onto the bed, heard the sound that she said still wakes her up every night. Claire said she finally screamed then, and the man ran out of my room, pushed past her and took off down the hallway. She ran to my room and saw the body face down on my bed, saw blood spreading across the back of those pajamas, and she was absolutely certain it was me. Claire's voice cracked when she said she called 911 and told them her roommate Madison had been shot, gave them my full description, identified the body as mine without ever seeing the face. She said even now, knowing the truth, her brain can't separate what she saw from what she believed. In her memory, it's still me falling, me dying, me lying dead on that bed. The trauma of witnessing that moment doesn't change just because the victim had a different name. I started seeing Natasha Mercer, the campus counselor, twice a week in her office on the 2nd floor of the Student Health Center. Natasha had kind eyes and a calm voice that never pushed me to talk faster than I was ready. She said what I was dealing with was complicated grief layered on top of survivor's guilt, layered on top of trauma. I was mourning a sister I never got to know, feeling guilty that she died in my place, processing anger at my parents for keeping secrets my whole life, and dealing with fear about Zacharias' obsession with me. Natasha said it was completely normal to feel overwhelmed when multiple traumas happen at once, that my brain was trying to process too many impossible things simultaneously. She taught me breathing exercises for when the panic attacks hit, gave me worksheets about identifying and naming emotions, helped me understand that grief doesn't follow a straight line. Some days I felt angry at Mila for breaking into my room without warning, then felt guilty for being angry at someone who died. Other days I felt angry at my parents for the secrets, then felt guilty because my mom had been sick and struggling. Natasha said all of it was valid, that I didn't have to choose one emotion or make sense of the contradictions. She said trauma makes everything messy and complicated, and the only way through it was to feel each thing as it came up instead of trying to organize it all into something neat. Quincy came over to my temporary dorm room most nights, and we'd sit on the bed not really talking, just being together in the quiet. One night he broke down crying and said he felt guilty about asking me to stay at his apartment that night. He said he kept thinking about alternate timelines, versions of reality where I went back to my dorm and died instead of Mila. Quincy said he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd traded one life for another, that Mila died because I was at his place. I tried to tell him that wasn't his fault, that he saved my life even if he didn't know it, but he just shook his head. He said he also kept thinking about a different timeline where I'd met Mila properly, where we'd become sisters and she'd still be alive. Quincy said he knew it was pointless to torture himself with what-ifs, but his brain wouldn't stop creating these alternative versions of events. I understood because I did the same thing, lying awake replaying that night over and over with different choices and different outcomes. We held each other and cried together, two people trying to process impossible grief and guilt that neither of us deserved to carry. The dean called me into her office 3 weeks after Mila's funeral and said the university wanted to move me to a new dorm permanently, that they understood I couldn't go back to Warren Hall after what happened. She said they were also providing free counseling services for as long as I needed them, that my sessions with Natasha would be completely covered. Professor Looney had already given me extensions on all my assignments and my other teachers followed her lead, telling me to take whatever time I needed. The dean said if I wanted to take a leave of absence for the rest of the semester, they would hold my spot and let me return in the fall without any penalties. I sat in her office looking at the same chair I'd sat in that first terrible morning when I learned someone had died in my place. I thought about leaving campus, going home to my parents and hiding from everything that happened here. But then I thought about Mila driving 3 hours in the middle of the night just to meet me, about how excited she'd been to finally connect with her twin sister. I thought about that drawing in her sketchbook of 2 girls hugging, the future she'd imagined for us. I told the dean I wanted to stay and finish the semester, that leaving felt like letting Zacharias win, like letting Mila's death erase me too. The dean nodded and said she understood, that she admired my strength. I didn't feel strong, but I felt determined, like I owed it to Mila to keep living the life she'd saved by being in my room that night. 2 days later, Detective Ramirez called while I was sitting in my temporary room staring at the ceiling. He said the district attorney filed formal charges against Zacharias for first-degree murder and stalking, life in prison without parole if convicted. I asked if his mental illness would get him off somehow, and the detective said no, that Zacharias had planned everything carefully over weeks, which proved he understood what he was doing. He researched my schedule, bought the gun legally, waited for the right moment. The detective said mental illness doesn't erase responsibility when someone plans a murder that deliberately. I thanked him and hung up feeling hollow, because even life in prison wouldn't bring Mila back. Susan called that afternoon and asked if I wanted to come pick up some of Mila's things. She said going through her room was too hard for them right now, but they thought I should have some of her belongings. I drove the 3 hours to their house with Quincy the next weekend. Susan met us at the door with red eyes and brought us upstairs to Mila's bedroom. The walls were covered in her artwork, paintings and sketches everywhere. Her clothes were still in the closet, books stacked on the desk, jewelry hanging from a little tree on her dresser. Susan handed me a box and said to take whatever I wanted. I picked up one of Mila's sweaters and held it to my face. It smelled like lavender and something else I couldn't name. I tried it on and it fit perfectly because we were the same size, the same everything. I went through her jewelry box and found a silver necklace with a tiny compass charm. Susan said Mila wore it every day. I put it on and haven't taken it off since. I filled the box with her clothes, some books, a stuffed elephant from her bed. Each object felt like a piece of the sister I never got to know. Susan hugged me before we left and said I could come back anytime for more. Back in my dorm room, I went through the box slowly, holding each item and trying to picture Mila wearing it or reading it or loving it. At the bottom, I found a journal with a purple cover, pages filled with her handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. The first entry was from 2 years ago. She wrote about feeling incomplete her whole life, like a piece of her was missing somewhere. She wrote about looking in the mirror and feeling like she was searching for something in her own reflection. I turned pages and found the entry from 6 weeks ago when she got her DNA test results back. She wrote that finding out about me felt like fate finally giving her answers, like the universe had been waiting to bring us together. She said she spent hours looking at my social media, studying my face, amazed at how identical we were. The last entry was 2 days before she died. She wrote about being nervous and excited to meet me, scared I wouldn't want to know her, but unable to wait any longer. She said she felt pulled toward me like a magnet. I cried reading her words, thinking about how close we came to being sisters. My relationship with my parents got worse over the next few weeks. Every time I looked at them, I felt angry about the secret they kept. My mom tried to explain over the phone that she was protecting me from pain, but I cut her off. I told her she was protecting herself from guilt, not me from anything. I said I deserved to know I had a sister out there somewhere. I deserved the chance to find her before it was too late. My dad tried to defend my mom, but I told him he was just as guilty for going along with it all these years. We barely spoke for 2 weeks until Natasha suggested we try family therapy together. She said the anger would eat me alive if I didn't work through it with them. The first therapy session was tense and awkward. We sat in the therapist's office not looking at each other until the therapist asked my mom to explain her decision to keep Mila secret. My mom broke down crying and talked about her postpartum depression, how bad it got after we were born. She said she felt like she was drowning and couldn't save both babies. couldn't be a good mother to twins when she could barely function. She said losing Mila destroyed her but also forced her to get help and treatment. She said thinking about Mila haunted her every single day, even as she tried to move forward with her life. She said she convinced herself that keeping the secret was protecting our family from more pain, when really it was just protecting her from facing what she'd done. I sat there listening and felt my anger soften a little because I could hear how much she'd suffered too. The therapist said we'd need many more sessions to work through everything, but this was a start. The next session, my dad finally spoke up. He admitted he let my mom keep the secret because he didn't want to face his own guilt about not getting her help sooner. He said he saw how sick she was after we were born, but he didn't know what to do. Didn't understand postpartum depression. Thought she'd get better on her own. He said when Mila was taken, he felt like it was punishment for his failure. He said watching me grieve for Mila now felt like the punishment he deserved for all the years he convinced himself the secret was protecting our family. He cried saying it, and I realized both my parents had been carrying this weight for 20 years, letting it crush them in different ways. I started reaching out to Mila's friends online, people who commented on her posts or were tagged in her photos. They responded right away, eager to talk about her. They shared memories and more photos with me. One friend said I had Mila's smile exactly, the way it was bigger on one side. Another said I moved my hands the same way when I talked. They could tell from my videos. Slowly, I started feeling connected to her even though we never met. I understood that we were part of each other even when we were separated, that being twins meant something deeper than just looking alike. Her friends told me stories about her kindness, her art, her laugh. Each story added another piece to the picture I was building of who my sister was. In October, the Whitmores called and invited me to spend Thanksgiving with them. Susan said they usually had a big family gathering and they wanted me there because I was family now too. I accepted immediately, wanting to see where Mila grew up and be around people who loved her. When Thanksgiving came, I drove to their house and met aunts and uncles and cousins who all stared at me like they were seeing a ghost. Susan took me up to Mila's room again, still decorated exactly how she left it. She said I was welcome anytime, that I should think of their house as a second home. Frank said having me there helped them feel closer to Mila somehow. I spent the weekend looking at photo albums and hearing stories about her childhood. It hurt, but it also felt right. Like I was finally getting to know the sister I should have grown up with. Detective Ramirez called in early December with news about the trial. The date was set for 6 months out, sometime in May. He said I'd have to testify about Zacharias' stalking behavior and social media obsession with me. My testimony would help prove he planned the murder ahead of time, which would make sure he got the maximum sentence. The detective said it wouldn't be easy, but it was important for getting justice for Mila. I agreed even though the thought of seeing Zacharias in person made me sick. I wanted him to pay for what he did. Wanted him locked away forever so he couldn't hurt anyone else the way he hurt my sister. I met with my academic advisor and told her I wanted to change my major to social work. She asked why, and I explained that this whole experience showed me how many systems failed everyone involved. My mom needed better support after we were born, better resources for postpartum depression. Mila deserved to know about her origins sooner, deserved the chance to find me before it was too late. Zacharias' mental illness should have been caught and treated before he became dangerous to others. I said I wanted to work in a field where I could help families in crisis get the support they needed before things fell apart. The advisor approved the change and helped me plan out my new course schedule. It felt good to turn this tragedy into something useful, to make Mila's death mean something more than just senseless violence. That night, Quincy stayed over in my temporary dorm room, and I woke up screaming at 2 a.m. from a nightmare where I was the one getting shot instead of Mila. He held me while I cried and didn't ask me to explain or tell me it was just a dream. He just let me shake until I could breathe again. Over the next few weeks, this became our routine. Him sleeping on my floor most nights because I couldn't handle being alone in the dark. He never complained about his back hurting from the terrible dorm carpet or about losing sleep before his early classes. One night I told him I felt broken and might never be normal again, and he said he didn't need me to be normal, he just needed me to be here. That's when I understood that having him at his apartment that night didn't just save my life physically, it gave me someone who could help me survive the after part too. I met with the dean in early January to talk about campus security improvements. She listened while I explained how easy it had been for Zacharias to get into my building, how the locks were old and simple to pick, how there were no cameras in the stairwells. I told her about researching other universities that had better stalking prevention programs and mental health resources for students showing warning signs. The dean took notes and said she'd been thinking about similar changes since the shooting. 2 months later, the university announced new security measures for all residence halls, including better locks, more cameras, and mandatory safety training for RAs. They created something called the Mila Whitmore Safety Initiative that would fund ongoing improvements and education programs. Seeing Mila's name on the official announcement made me cry in my dorm room. But it was the good kind of crying because her death was going to help protect other students from going through what we all went through. My parents invited the Whitmores to dinner at a restaurant near campus in February. I sat between both sets of parents feeling weird about the whole situation, like I was the only thing connecting these two families who loved the same person in completely different ways. My mom and Susan cried together talking about Mila as a baby, with my mom apologizing over and over for what happened, and Susan saying she understood it was complicated. Frank and my dad talked about Mila's artwork and how talented she was, and my dad admitted he'd missed out on knowing his other daughter because of choices he and my mom made. By the end of dinner, they were planning a memorial scholarship fund for art students at the local community college where Mila had taken classes. Both families would contribute money every year, and the scholarship would be given to a student who showed Mila's kind of creativity and passion. The Whitmores said it would help them feel like Mila's artistic spirit was living on through other students, and my parents said it was the least they could do to honor the daughter they never got to raise. I started visiting Mila's grave every Sunday afternoon. The cemetery was 20 minutes from campus, and I'd drive there after lunch, park near her section, and walk to the headstone that had her name and dates carved into gray marble. The Whitmores had chosen a spot under a big tree where the light came through the leaves in patches. I'd sit on the grass next to her grave and talk out loud about my week, my classes, the things I was learning about social work and trauma. I told her I was sorry we never got to meet properly, that I wished she'd messaged me on social media instead of breaking into my room that night. I brought flowers every week, usually sunflowers because I'd learned from her Instagram that those were her favorite. Sometimes I brought art supplies too, like the fancy colored pencils she'd posted about wanting, and I'd leave them on her grave as gifts to the sister I should have grown up knowing. Other people visiting their own family members would stare at me talking to a headstone, but I didn't care because it felt like the only way I could have a relationship with Mila now. Claire came back to campus in March after 3 months of intensive therapy at a treatment center. She'd moved into a different dorm building on the other side of campus, somewhere without any memories of that night. She texted me asking if we could meet for coffee, and I said yes, even though I was nervous about seeing her again. We met at the student center, and she looked smaller somehow, like the trauma had taken up space inside her. She told me her therapist had been helping her separate me from what she saw that night, learning to see Madison the person instead of the image of someone dying that was burned into her brain. She said it was hard because every time she looked at me, she saw Mila falling, heard the gunshot, remembered the blood. But she was working on it because she didn't want to lose our friendship over something that wasn't my fault. I told her I understood if she needed distance and I wouldn't be hurt, but she said no. She wanted to try because running away from things wasn't helping her heal. We met for coffee every week after that, and slowly she stopped flinching when I moved too fast or made sudden gestures. 6 months after Mila died, I sat in a courtroom waiting to give my victim impact statement at Zacharias' trial. Detective Ramirez had prepared me for what to expect, but nothing really gets you ready to see the person who killed your sister sitting 20 feet away looking blank and empty. The prosecutor called me to the witness stand, and I walked up there with my hands shaking, took the oath, and sat down facing the jury. I read from the statement I'd written and rewritten a dozen times, talking about how Zacharias' obsession with me had killed a sister I never got to know. I explained that Mila had just found out she had a twin, and was excited to meet me, that she died in my place wearing my pajamas, because some stranger decided he had the right to end my life over a fantasy relationship that never existed. I said he'd stolen any chance Mila and I had to know each other, to be sisters, to have the relationship we deserved. The jury watched me cry through the whole thing, and I saw a few of them wiping their own eyes. The trial lasted 3 more days, but the jury only needed 2 hours to find him guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without possibility of parole. Detective Ramirez told me afterward that the conviction was solid, and Zacharias would die in prison, which should have felt like justice, but mostly just felt empty, because Mila was still gone. I organized a memorial event for Mila on the 1-year anniversary of her death. The university let me use a big room in the student center, and I spent weeks planning how to honor her properly. I contacted her friends from home, and they sent me photos and stories about her. The Whitmores gave me permission to display some of her artwork, these beautiful drawings and paintings she'd made throughout high school. I set up easels around the room with her art, and printed out photos of her life, creating a gallery that showed who she really was beyond just being my twin who died tragically. On the night of the event, hundreds of students showed up, way more than I expected. Some had known about the shooting and wanted to pay respects. Others were just moved by her story and her art. People wrote messages on a memory board about how Mila's death had made them think differently about campus safety and mental health. Landon came from 3 hours away and gave a speech about what an amazing friend Mila had been, how she'd always been there for people who needed support. The Whitmores stood next to me the whole night, and Susan kept squeezing my hand, and I felt like we were giving Mila the recognition she deserved, showing everyone she was a real person with a full life, not just a tragedy. My relationship with my parents slowly got better as we worked through everything in family therapy. My mom finally showed me the photos she'd kept hidden of Mila as a newborn, pictures of both of us together in those first 3 days before everything fell apart. We sat on my parents' couch looking at tiny babies in pink blankets, and my mom pointed out which one was me and which was Mila, based on small differences only a mother would notice. She cried telling me about how overwhelmed she'd been, how the depression made her feel like she was drowning and couldn't take care of either of us properly. I cried too because I could see in the photos that she'd loved us both, that losing Mila had broken something in her that never fully healed. My dad admitted he should have gotten my mom more help instead of trying to handle everything himself and pretending the problem would go away. We all agreed that keeping Mila's secret from me was wrong, that I deserved to know about my twin sister even if the circumstances were painful. It didn't fix everything overnight, but it was a start, and I felt like we were finally being honest with each other as a family, instead of hiding behind comfortable lies. Quincy and I made things official that spring and started looking at apartments together for the next school year. We found a small place off campus with 2 bedrooms and old hardwood floors. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. He understood that I'd always carry grief for Mila, and never tried to make me get over it or move on faster than I was ready. When I wanted to talk about her, he listened. And when I needed to cry about missing someone I never really knew, he held me without trying to fix it. The Whitmores became like a second family to me, and Quincy supported that relationship, driving me to their house for dinners and holidays, never making me feel like I had to choose between my birth family and Mila's adoptive family. He got along great with Frank and Susan, and they told me multiple times how glad they were that I had someone good taking care of me. Moving in together felt like a big step toward building a real adult life, one where I could honor Mila's memory while still moving forward with my own future. I graduated with my social work degree in May, 2 years after Mila died. My parents and the Whitmores all came to the ceremony and sat together in the audience. These 2 families permanently connected through loving the same person. I walked across the stage to get my diploma thinking about how different my life had turned out from what I'd imagined, how one night had changed everything and led me to this career path I never would have was chosen otherwise. A month later, I started my first job at a family services organization, helping families in crisis access mental health resources and support. Every client I worked with felt like honoring Mila's memory, like making sure other families didn't get torn apart by circumstances they couldn't control the way ours had been. When I helped a struggling mother get connected with postpartum depression treatment, I thought about my mom and how different things might have been if she'd gotten that kind of support. When I worked with adoptive families, I thought about the Whitmores and how much love they'd given Mila. The work was hard and emotionally draining, but it felt right, like I was turning tragedy into something useful, making Mila's death count for something more than just senseless violence that destroyed our chance to be sisters. The Whitmores started inviting me to every family dinner, every holiday, every birthday celebration. Susan called me one evening in November asking if I wanted to help decorate for Thanksgiving, and when I arrived, she had Mila's favorite recipes laid out on the counter. We cooked together, and she told me that having me there helped her feel like Mila was still part of their family somehow, like we were keeping her alive through our connection. I felt the same way. Like by knowing them, I got to know pieces of my sister I'd never have otherwise. Christmas that year, I split the day between my parents in the morning and the Whitmores in the evening, and it felt right having both families, honoring both parts of who I was. Frank hung a stocking with my name next to where Mila's used to hang, and I cried seeing it because it meant I belonged there too. I kept Mila's sketchbook in my apartment and looked through it whenever I felt lost or overwhelmed by life. The drawing she'd made of us together, 2 identical girls with their arms around each other smiling, sat on my desk where I saw it every morning. She'd imagined a future we never got to have, but I carry her with me in everything I do now. When I help families at work, when I spend holidays with the Whitmores, when I make choices about my life, I think about living for both of us. She saved my life by being in my room that night even though she didn't know it, and I promise her memory every day that I'll make it count, that I'll live fully enough for 2 people who should have grown up together.